One of the main reasons people don't believe in Jesus is they've never seen a clear picture of him. Let's talk about this in part 4 of our Advent series, Long Live the King of Kings. I read a survey that showed some top characteristics, some top qualities that people appreciated in their leadership. So their employer, their boss. And right up near the top of the list was somebody who kept their word. And I thought for a second, really, is that what we're looking for just in an employer? I mean, don't we want that in anybody, in a friend, in anybody that we would interact with, that what they say is what they're actually going to do? But you probably know, I know that I know people like this that are all talk and no action. I once had to associate with a guy that he was the picture of this. If you looked up in the dictionary that phrase, all talk, no action, you would have seen this guy. He was constantly telling you things that he was going to do, and then he was constantly telling you the excuses of why he couldn't do what he promised you he was going to do. I remember one time he asked me what I had going for the weekend, and I told him that my wife and I would be celebrating our anniversary. And he started telling about how he's going to get a limo for us, and he was going to make a reservation at a really nice restaurant, and on and on. Well, needless to say, I just went on with the plans that I already had, and my wife and I had a lovely celebration. I never saw a limo, never had anybody call me to confirm my reservation at a restaurant. The next week, when I saw this guy, I didn't mention anything about his lack of follow through, and surprisingly, or unsurprisingly, he didn't mention anything either. See, people like that, after a while, you just stop listening to what they're saying. You just go, you know what? You are just talking. You can't follow through on this. You're not going to follow through on this. I know it. So I'm just going to make my own plans and just move ahead as though you hadn't said anything. You know, I think that is almost easier to work around than the one who is very well intentioned and says they're going to do something for you, and they start doing something for you, but then they run out of resources, or they just get tired, or there's something that trips them up. They just don't have the power. They don't have the clout to be able to see it through to the end. What's frustrating about that one, as compared to the all talk and no action guy, is that you probably didn't make any plans of your own. You thought, hey, look, they said this and they started doing this, and so I'm just going to let them do it. And then you kind of get out there a little bit, and all of a sudden they drop the ball and they can't pick it up again, and you're scrambling, and it seems a little too late for you to try to come up with something. When we come to the life of Jesus, we see some people that crucify Jesus because of they may have originally thought that Jesus was all talk and no action. But as Jesus goes on, as we read through the Gospels and we see that there's miracles that he does, and some of his teachings just astound people. And these religious leaders, the Sanhedrin, the chief priests, they begin to realize, well, maybe this guy's not all talk and no action, because if anything, he has the ability to at least get a crowd. He can kind of sway people and maybe get some emotional response. And we look around and we see this big throng of people that are now starting to gravitate towards him. But they definitely didn't think that Jesus was one that could follow through, that he was going to only go so far, and then he wasn't going to be able to go any farther. After all, right then they were dealing with Rome, and they looked around at Jesus and they said, he comes from Nazareth. That's kind of a poor town. He doesn't have money. He doesn't have an army. He doesn't have, they could go down through the list. How is he ever going to see this thing through? And so their best response is, let me just get him out of the way, because he's kind of messing up the plans that we've got going. We're already angling a certain way. We're already taking care of some things on our own, and he's kind of getting in the way. And so the Sanhedrin gets together and they decide that they're going to have Jesus eliminated. They go to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, and they say, we need this guy crucified. And Pilate eventually agrees to that, and Jesus is hanging on the cross. Now, let me take you to Matthew chapter 27, because as Jesus is hanging on the cross, you can hear the language here in these religious leaders that they didn't think that Jesus had the power to get done what he said that he was going to get done. So in Matthew chapter 27, I'll start in verse 41. In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked Jesus. He saved others, they said. Now listen to this phrase, but he can't save himself. Do you hear in there that those undertones of, yeah, he may have started doing something. He may have talked a good game. He may have even started doing it because they said he saved others. But when it comes right down to it, I mean, who has the power to get themselves out of this? The next line, he's the king of Israel. Now, they weren't saying that as a fact. You can hear the sarcasm. So it's probably more like he's the king of Israel. Right. Okay, that's what they're saying there. He's the king of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. Show us that you've got the power to do these things that you said that you were going to do, and we'll believe in you. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him. Let God rescue him now if he wants him. For he said, I am the Son of God. That's what you said. So now let's see if God, your Father, is going to come and rescue you. And then we'll believe in you after that. In the same way, the robbers who were crucified with him also heaped insults on him. So you can hear that language in there that tells you that they said, all right, yeah, you've done some things. You're not all talk and no action, but is there any power behind what you're doing, or are you just another voice on the scene? No, let's back up a little bit. Jesus is already hanging on the cross here, but you can hear Pilate in the same way kind of being a little bit confused when the Sanhedrin brings Jesus in, because Pilate says, I don't see anything wrong with this guy. Why do you want to kill him? Why do you want to get rid of him? He didn't realize their undertones, their ulterior motives, that they're like, this guy's going to mess up our plans. We got to get him out of here. And so Pilate begins to engage these religious leaders in dialogue. And he says, look, here is your king. This is the king that you want, right? But they shouted, take him away, crucify him. You can still hear Pilate's confusion here. Shall I crucify your king? And listen to this line. We have no king but Caesar, the chief priests answered. See, they said, this is how we're going to have to angle here. Let's pretend to get in good with Pilate. Let's pretend to be a supporter of Caesar, because that'll at least help us in the next step of our plans that we're working on here. But this Jesus, he's getting in the way. You see, they've had experience with this before. Let me fast forward and I'll show you where we get this. So Jesus dies on the cross and he is resurrected back to life. He ascends to heaven, and now his followers are out telling everybody that you need to put your faith in Jesus. And this same Sanhedrin said, oh man, these guys are starting to stir up the same sort of crowds and reaction that Jesus did. We need to nip this thing in the bud as well. And so they bring Peter and John in before him, and they've tried to shut them down and it hasn't worked. And now they're contemplating their next steps. But there is a man that's here in the Sanhedrin. His name is Gamaliel. He's well educated. He's well respected. He has some connections. He certainly has a level of influence. And he says, I want to remind you of something. I want to give you a little bit of a history lesson. So now listen to this. This is actually taking place. The events that Gamaliel is recalling are prior to Jesus being born in Bethlehem. Here's what he says. He says, some time ago, Theudas appeared claiming to be somebody. So he had some talk. Did he have action behind it? Well, he says he's claiming to be somebody, and about 400 men rallied to him. Okay, so he had some power to follow through. He wasn't just all talk and no action. There was some action there, but then he says he was killed and all of his followers were dispersed and it all came to nothing. Okay, and then he gives another example. He says after him, Judas the Galilean appeared in the days of the census. So this is right around the time that Jesus is going to be born in Bethlehem, and led a band of people in revolt. He too was killed, and all his followers were scattered. So now the Sanhedrin, they've seen Theudas, they've seen Judas, and maybe there was other people. And now here's this Jesus, and they said, yeah, sure, he's got a following of people. And certainly, I mean, it says here about Theudas that he had 400 followers. We see Jesus with thousands at times around him. But come on, can he really follow through on this? What was it that was lacking there? They were saying, we really need to see some proof. We need to, how do we know that this is the real deal, that you can really do what it is that you say that you're going to do? Well, let me show you some examples of how exactly it is that people go from being doubters to being believers. Let me take you to the beginning of Jesus's ministry in John chapter 1. Jesus has already called Andrew and Peter to be his followers. And as he's getting ready to leave their town, it says this in John chapter 1, the next day Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said to him, "Follow me." Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethsaida, and Philip found Nathanael and told him, now listen, he says, we're going to go back to the First Testament and all the prophets. He says, we have found the one Moses wrote about in the law and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. We have found the one that right here, all the prophets talked about it. Moses talked about it. Were they all talk and no action? That's kind of the thing, that people were wondering. See, we talked about this in the first message in this series, that right at the end of the First Testament, the very last prophet, Malachi, he said, there's people that they said, we've been waiting for a long time. We haven't seen this advent of Jesus. We haven't seen the Messiah appear like the prophets have said. We also saw that Peter wrote that in his first epistle, that people are going to say that leading up to the second advent, the time that we live in now. People are going to say the same thing. Where's the promise of this? Is it all talk and no action? And so now this is what Philip and Nathanael are having this conversation. Nathanael's saying, I've kind of heard this before. It sounds like all talk and no action, especially listen to how he responds here, because Philip told him that he's Jesus of Nazareth. He says, Nazareth? Can anything good come from there? That's the wrong side of the tracks. There's no authority. There's no clout there. There's no political connections in Nazareth. How's this going to happen? Philip says, come and see. When Jesus saw Nathanael approaching, he said of him, here is a true Israelite in whom there is nothing false. How do you know me? Nathanael asked. Jesus answered, I saw you while you were still under the fig tree before Philip called you. Then Nathanael declared, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. What happened? Well, he said, I heard that this was just all talk, but now you've just said something that's proving to me that you have some authority that other people haven't had. Let's go a little bit farther in John's Gospel. John chapter 4, Jesus is traveling through the region of Samaria, and he stops there and he's talking to a woman at the well, and he asks her if he can have a drink of water. And listen to what she says to him. The Samaritan woman said, you are a Jew. And she's really saying you're a Jewish man, because you'll hear it here. You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? So she's saying, hey, listen, men and women that aren't married don't have conversations in public. And then John tells us this. He puts it in parentheses, for Jews do not associate with Samaritans. So this woman is saying, okay, listen, you're not even supposed to be talking to me. Why are you trying to have a conversation with me? But Jesus just continues to talk to her. He continues to talk to her about living water, about a really satisfaction, not just for your physical body, but for your soul. And then he says to her at one point, he says, why don't you go get your husband and bring him, and let's talk a little bit more. She says, well, I don't have a husband. He says, you're right. You've been married and divorced so many times, and the guy that you're with right now isn't even your husband. And that gets her attention. Just kind of like what Jesus had said to Nathanael. Now listen to this. She also said, I've heard, but I wonder if it's all talk and no action. Verse 25 of John 4, the woman said, I know that Messiah, called Christ, is coming. I hope that he's coming. In other words, what she's really saying, when he comes, he will explain everything to us. And Jesus replied, I who speak to you am he. You're waiting for something. I'm already here. So she goes into town. She runs back from the well. She goes into town and she says, listen, come, see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Christ? Okay, so she went from, all right, I've heard about this. I don't know if it's just all talk and no action. But now Jesus is saying, nope, I'm the one. And so now she's saying, okay, come and see, could this be the guy that's actually going to follow through? That he's actually going to do what he says that he's going to do? And Jesus has an interaction with the people. And the story concludes by the townspeople now speaking to the Samaritan woman. And they said to the woman, we no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Savior of the world. Remember, I told you about, just in passing, in Matthew chapter 27, the religious leaders are hurling their insults at Jesus. And the last verse I read says, in the same way, the robbers who were crucified with him also heaped insults on him. The robbers, two of them. Now, remember, they're saying, hey, if you come down off the cross, that'll prove to us. I mean, you claim to be the Son of God. Let's see if God is actually going to save you. Jesus has already told people, he said, I have the authority to lay my life down, and I have the authority to pick it up again. And so these religious leaders are saying, really, let's see if that's true. Can you really follow through on that? But Jesus said, I don't need to try to prove something to you in this moment, because I'm going to have this ultimate proof for you in 3 days when I'm resurrected. And so instead of arguing with them, instead of fighting with them, instead of, like he told his disciples, he said, I could call legions of angels to get me out of this. But he says, I want everything to be fulfilled. I don't want to be an all talk and no action person. I don't want to start doing something and then fall short. I'm going to see this through to the end. So instead of responding to these taunts by saying, let me show you, and he could pop those nails right out, call down angels, and just come down off the cross. Instead, Luke records for us that Jesus says, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. They do not know what they're doing. Now remember, it said both the criminals, plural, were hurling insults at Jesus. Just a couple verses farther down, now after Jesus says, Father, forgive them, Luke writes this, one of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. And you can hear still the skepticism. Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself. Oh, and save us too. But the other criminal rebuked him. Don't you fear God, he said, since we are under the same sentence? We are being punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong. See, I think that the way that he heard Jesus respond, he said, that's not the way that I would have expected somebody to respond. Somebody that he's not trying to prove something. He's just saying, I already so firmly believe in my Father that I'm asking him to forgive. I so firmly believe that my Father is God and I am his son that I can ask him to forgive these people who are insulting me. And so this man says, I place my faith in you. You aren't just all talk and no action. Well, let me show you one other example. And this is 3 days later after Jesus is resurrected from the dead. They've had a woman now among their group. The disciples have had a woman that's come back to them and said, I went to the tomb. The stone was rolled away. I looked inside. The tomb was empty. There was an angel there. And the angel told me that Jesus was risen from the dead. And then I saw a guy that I thought was the gardener. And it was Jesus. And so Peter and John, they take off. John's gospel records this in chapter 20. So Peter and the other disciple, that's John, ran for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter, who was behind him, arrived and went into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the burial cloth that had been around Jesus' head. The cloth was folded up by itself, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went inside. He saw and believed. See, the Jesus had told them ahead of time that this is what was going to happen. He gave them very specific things. He told them, we are going to Jerusalem. The Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles, that's Pontius Pilate and the Romans, to be mocked and flogged and crucified. And on the third day, he will be raised back to life. See, Jesus told them that that was going to happen. But let's back up a little bit. What about all the prophets? Remember that Philip said to Nathanael, Moses and the prophets talked about this? The prophets all gave very specific prophecies about Jesus, like, for instance, that he would be born of a virgin, that he would be born in Bethlehem. All of those prophecies were made. They weren't just all talk and no action. But Jesus came to show that he had the power to fulfill those things. And now, when you come to the end of Jesus's public ministry, when he's being crucified, and the mocks and the insults and the taunts are all trying to get him to prove it again, he says, I don't have to do anything. I can trust my Father that he's going to carry this through, that he has the power to complete this. Now, we saw these doubters in Nathanael and the Samaritan woman and all the Samaritan people in her village, and this criminal on the cross, and even the disciples of Jesus. We saw them going from doubters to believers. What was it that prompted them to make that switch from doubting to believing? There's a common theme for all of them. But let me show it to you backwards first. I want you to see what Brennan Manning wrote. The greatest single cause of atheism in the world today, so atheism is not believing in God, is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips, walk out the door, and deny him by their lifestyle. That is what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable. See, people need to see the proof. So think about this. Go back to Philip, says to Nathanael, all right, Moses, the prophets, they all wrote about Jesus, and he's here. And Nathanael goes, really? I mean, he comes from Nazareth. Are you sure? What was Philip's response? Come and see. Don't take my word for it. Observe it for yourself. What about the Samaritan woman? Jesus said, let me tell you some things about your past. And she went to the other villagers and she said to them the same words, come and see. Come and meet this man for yourself. And then they said to her, we believe now because we have seen it for ourselves. We've heard it for ourselves. Isn't that exactly the criminal hanging on the cross? He real easily just got caught up in the taunts and the mocking of everybody else until he saw it for himself. He saw the love that Jesus had. He saw the confidence that he had that his Father was going to take him all the way through and bring him back to life. He saw it, he heard it, and he put his faith in Jesus. Or these disciples here, the phrase, they saw and believed. Jesus told them, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to go to Jerusalem, be crucified. I'm going to be raised back to life. I have the authority to lay my life down and to pick it up again. And now this is what's happened. They saw it and they believed it. So friends, Jesus isn't physically here on earth right now, but you and I are. The people who are called Christians, the people who have placed their faith in Jesus, who have had their sins forgiven and know what it is to live for the King of Kings, they're the ones that people need to come and see. Paul said it this way in Romans chapter 10, how then can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? That's you and I. We have to show them our lives. We have to show them that we believe that Jesus is who he says he is. It's not just all talk and no action, but neither is it some action, but not enough power to see it through. They need to see a life that is completely and totally transformed and empowered by a relationship with Jesus. Not like these religious leaders that said, you know what, he's messing up our plans, so let's get rid of him so that we can just stick with our own plans. But people need to see in us a complete and total trust in Jesus. They need to see us living our life this way. Recently, somebody asked me, we oversee a program, help coordinate a program that gets food out to 200 students every weekend so that they have food at home over the weekend. And somebody says, boy, that's a lot of work. Why do you do this? And I said, well, I do it quite simply because Jesus said that this is what we should do. He said, if you see somebody who's hungry, feed them. And we're aware of 200 students that are hungry. And so we're going to feed them. It requires a lot of work, but we're going to do this. And we trust that Jesus is going to provide the resources that are necessary. And he does from unexpected sources. People do food drives for us. People donate money. People donate their time to pack the food and deliver the food. All this takes place so that we can show the love of Jesus. Well, this is exactly what Jesus told us in Matthew chapter 5. He uses the analogy of a bright light shining, not on us, but a bright light shining through us to point people back to the one that we're pointing to. So he said this in John chapter 5. In the same way, let your light shine before others that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Peter takes this a little bit further. He says it's not just doing things like, for instance, in our case, sending food home with students so that they have that. But what about the way that you respond when people treat you poorly, like Jesus hanging on the cross? Oh, King of Israel, right. Come down and then we'll believe it. What about when you have some difficulty in your life? You have some pain in your life. You have something difficult going on and people say, oh, sure. Do you believe in Jesus now? Do you believe in God now that he could help you through this? Even then, can you still say, I believe that Jesus has the power to do what he said that he was going to do to fulfill all of his promises? So Peter writes it this way. Live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. See, both Jesus and Peter are saying it's not about people seeing us. It's about people seeing the God that we believe in, the King of Kings that we put our faith in. So, friends, we can go back and look, and we can say, look at all these promises in the First Testament that point to the first advent of Jesus. And it took place. And then we see in the Gospels all these promises that Jesus made. I am going to be crucified, and I am going to be resurrected back to life. And we can read that those are true. We can read the words of Jesus in the Gospel. We can read the words of the apostles in the epistles that say that Jesus is coming a second time. His second advent is coming. But because we can look back on those first two things and say they were promised and they were delivered on, that means that the second advent that was also promised, I know that God can deliver on that as well. And that's how I'm going to live my life, is trusting his promise. See, friends, you and I today, we can play a key role in turning doubters, skeptics, people who wonder, is this just all talk and no action? Can this really change my life? Does it have the power to get me to the end? They are going to be convinced by looking at you and I. You and I need to have this same kind of, as we saw with these people here in the Bible, the same kind of come and see attitude. See, for those who are skeptical of the things that Jesus said or the things that others wrote about Jesus, we have to live in a way that makes them true. We have to help them see the King of Kings. So you may not use the same words like Philip to Nathanael, come and see, or the Samaritan woman, come and see. It might not be those exact same words, but we can live a life focused on the King of Kings, trusting the King of Kings, loving the King of Kings, no matter what the circumstances are around us. So friends, that is really the greatest Christmas gift that you can give to a skeptical, doubting friend. Somebody who wonders, can they follow? Can these words of Jesus be trusted? Can we really put our faith in that? Is it all talk and just no action? When they see your life, that there's action behind it that is based on a trust in a God who keeps his promises, then you can continue to do such good things everywhere you go, live such a good life, as Peter says, that invites people to come and see. I like the way that John Wesley, this statement just really kind of sums it up, and it's pretty all inclusive. He tells us this: do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can. The first Advent is our reminder that God keeps his promises, and that builds our faith for the second Advent that Jesus just assuredly said is going to take place. So friends, let's live with that assurance. Give people that amazing Christmas gift, not just at Christmas time, but year round. Let them come and see in your life the trust that you have in the King of Kings and in the King of Israel, so that they too can place their faith in the one who keeps his promises. God bless you, friends. As always, I'd love to be able to dialogue with you and answer questions. I've shared a link below on how you can get in touch with me. Please reach out to me if you've got questions, if you would like me to pray with you, if you want me to help you dig deeper on any of these topics. I would love to be able to do that. May you have a very Merry Christmas, celebrating the first Advent of Jesus and looking forward to his soon second Advent. God bless you, friends. I love you.